This is the first part of the master budget videos to accompany Chapter 8 in your textbook. Budgeting is one of the most significant areas that companies engage in because it creates a financial roadmap to help them guide their operations. It also gives management the ability to assess their performance given what their expectations was on that budget. In creating a master budget, all aspects of the business must be dealt with, and this can be a rather daunting task. So it's very unlikely that one person will create this budget, but yet will be shared among many and several departments working together to construct this. We're going to look at a very small company, and we are going to create its master budget for 1 quarter. Now the reason why I'm using 1 quarter instead of a full year is the fact that the longer the window of time that you are going to prepare a budget, it becomes a bit more risky in terms of your accuracy. It's very difficult to predict with extreme accuracy when the time involved is rather significant. And even though you're probably thinking, well, 1 year is not that big of a deal, but a lot can transpire in a year. What we do instead is tend to use shorter windows and then allow us to create what is called a rolling budget. We will just use 3 months, for example, this quarter, and as 1 month ends, we would add another month. So for example, January, February, and March, when January's month is about to end, we would add April on there. So we always have 3 months at one time. And what this allows us to do is be more responsive to those unanticipated changes that could cause some of our estimates and our budgets to differ. Thereby, we can make better financing and allocation decisions on an ongoing basis instead of setting aside a budget for a year only to realize that it's not going to be truly appropriate when major changes affect the operations of the company. The exact example that we're going to use is for a manufacturer. Now please note that companies could also be merchandisers or a service provider, and I am going to have 2 examples of those 2 available for you, but we're going to look at the manufacturing side because it tends to be the more complex of the 3. The data that I gave you is for Spring Company, and the actual information provides you with a balance sheet as of year 1. This is all actual data. This is what has already occurred. It is not expectations. It is not estimates. These are our actual facts. The rest of this sheet represents all of the expectations that the different departments have presented so that we can create this master budget. So when I look here for the sales information, of course since December was from last year, that has already happened. But all of these months, these are our budgets. In other words, these are our estimates. And we're going to get these in part from our marketing department that helps us do sales projections. All of the rest of the data on this sheet will eventually come to, but if you notice, it is different estimates of what we think will happen. And here's what our master budget is going to consist of. We're going to do it for the first quarter of year 2, 3 months, and we're actually going to prepare 13 different budgets. Now please note, this is not the end-all be-all of all budgets. This is just an example. Budgeting is highly customized given the differing companies' needs. So there is no one size fits all. So please don't think that this is the only budget that is available that I'm presenting to you. This is just one example. The first budget we're going to create is the sales budget. And on the sales budget, we only need two pieces of information. We need to know the units that we are planning on selling and the prices expected thereof. So I'm going to take January, February, and March's data. And if you look on your sheet, all of this is already prepared for you. What you need to do is, as I go through this, is make notes how each number is calculated so that you will be able to create one yourself. So this is basically what you have on your sheet. I took those estimated sales in units and those sales prices, and I simply multiplied those two values to get sales revenue for each of the months. Now, please note, when you do create this, it is extremely important that you use formulas referencing cell addresses in Excel. So when I come in to do January, I'm going to say, take January sales in units, multiply it by the price, and that will give me the revenue for January. And I'll do the same thing for February and March. And then over here for the quarter, I can just simply total those 3 months. And that will yield me $859,200. We typically do not add the number of units, and it's obvious I cannot add the sales prices. The reason why we typically don't add all this is because when prices differ, it's not very meaningful over here to come up with an average price. We're more concerned of what is the trend on our price. Is it increasing or decreasing, or is it steady? And that average does not tell me anything about that. Now, I could add the total up here of units, but again, it's not really going to add anything to it. Now, I also want you to understand that on this example, I am making one big assumption, that this company only sells one unit. If you have a company that sells multiple different kinds of products, then you would have to create a sales budget for each item that you are selling. So if we are, say, an automobile manufacturer, and we are dealing with a particular plant, say for example Nissan, then we would look at the different vehicles that are produced in that facility, and we would create a sales budget for each one of those. So this could be trucks, this could be cars, and then we can combine all the individual sales budgets into one great totaled sales budget. Now, again, doing that is not going to change what we're doing on a simplistic approach. It's just that you're going to be doing it more frequently. So the sales budget is really rather simple to do. It creates the starting point for everything, because this sales revenue up here is going to tell me how much I have available to spend, and also what are the resource demands I'm going to need in order to achieve those sales. The next budget we're going to look at is the cash collections, and it is the natural follow-through of the sales budget. It would be very unrealistic for me to assume that a company only sells things with cash. In fact, this company does things both with cash and credit. So if I go back to the data sheet, you can see the following. It says that sales are made 25% in cash and 75% on credit. And these credit sales, we're going to say that 70% of these are collected next month. So that basically implies that 30% will be collected this month. Now, I'm also aware that sometimes people just don't pay when they do things on credit. I'm not ignoring the fact that that is true. We're going to come back to that very point when we get a little bit further down into the budget. So let's go back and take this data and create our cash collections budget. Now, in order to help me do this, I broke it up into two parts, the cash sales and the credit sales. When it comes to the cash sales, remember it said that 25% were in cash. So I'm just going to, again, use my cell references in my formulas and say, of January, I want 25%, because that is what is coming in cash. And I will do this for February and for March, and of course for the quarter I can add across that row. When it comes to the credit sales, I need to do a little bit more work. So I'm going to take this January, February, and March, and I'm going to create myself a little chart over here. So here's what I know to be true about the credit sales. We are told that 75% of what I'm selling is credit. And I know that I'm going to need the current month and of course the next month here. So let's really not use this language, but let's just go back and refer to these month names all over again. And I'm just going to say January, February, March, and then I'll put in context what is this month and what is next month. So if I make a credit sale in January, we're told that 70% of that will be collected in February. So I'm going to come over here and put 70%. And of course that implies that 30% will be in January. When it comes to February, the month after it is sold would be March, and so that would be 70%, again implying that 30% would be in February. And I'm basically going to follow this all the way down. So you get this sort of stair-stepping effect. And of course I could come up here and put April now. But if we look at it, in any given month, there are two pieces. But there's a piece missing for January here. And that would have been from December. Remember, if something is made in a given month, part of it won't be collected until the following month. So that means when I looked at December over here, that it has already been collected in part here, but there is a portion yet to be collected, and that would have flowed through in January. Now, I know that I'm using percentages down here, and I'm not going to come up here and put 30% and 70% because these are estimates. These are expectations. And December has already happened, so it's real known data. So it's been collected. There's nothing else to do. When it comes to January, again, I don't have to estimate what these are because the sale has already happened in December, and when you take out what you've already collected, you know exactly what is yet to be. And this amount should be reflected in our accounts receivable that should be on our balance sheet. So if I go back, there it is right there, $157,500. That is what is left over from December that should be collected in January. So I don't have to calculate that. It's already known data. So let's take this known data, and basically I can put that right there. And we are going to calculate all of these estimates out given 75% of our credit sales. Now, one last thing before we go do that. If I know that December is going to represent the beginning accounts receivable, then when I get down here to March, this 70% that is carrying over, well, that's going to be your ending accounts receivable as of the end of this quarter. Now, we're going to come back and calculate this value a little bit later, so I'm going to leave all this intact so that at the appropriate time we can refer back to it. But let's take all of this data right here, and we're going to go back and put this in the context of our master budget. So here's what I'm going to do for January. We know we have that $157,500, and we're going to have to add to that. I'm going to create a little parenthetical expression just to keep it separate. We know that 75% of what happened in January is credit sales. And from what we just saw over here, we know we're going to get 30% of that. So let me come back over here and put 30%. So again, before I hit enter, there is the accounts receivable that carried over. Then we're going to say, what is credit sales for this month? Well, it's 75%. And then of that, I will be collecting 30 this month. And when I do that, it will yield the value that's on your sheet. Now I'm going to do February too, just because it does involve a separate calculation. So let's go back again and look at the sheet. In February, I need to show 70% of January, and I need to show 30% of February. So let's go back over here. So remember, everything is 75% credits. So of January, I want the other 70%, that which is collected the month after. Then I'm going to add to this, again, 75% to get it to the credit portion of the current month, February, and just like we did in January, let's multiply that by 30%. So of January's credit sales, 70% will be collected, and of February's credit sales, 30% will be collected. And that will yield, of course, a value on your sheet. I do the same thing for March. Now, I can add each month's, I can add across the rows, and of course I can add the quarter totals, but this basically tells me what your cash that you have to spend. And please note, it is not the same as what you budgeted as your sales revenue, and this is factoring in the fact that some of that credit just may not be paid yet. Alright, so before we go on, let's go back and calculate this ending accounts receivable. And I'm going to put that over on the master budget just so that we don't have to keep going back and forth to the sheets. So we want 70% of March's credit sales. So I'm just going to put this, I suppose, right over here. And I'm going to say accounts receivable. And this, of course, will be at the end of the quarter, which would be March 31st. This is going to be, take 75% of March's total sales to get the credit, and I want 70% of that, which of course is what will carry over in the future. Now, that's typing in the value. Let me actually do the calculation for us. So the accounts receivable that would show up on the balance sheet for the first quarter, March 31st, would be $159,600. Now we're going to take this when we get down a little bit further, because if you notice on your data sheet, the very last budget we're going to create is the balance sheet, and we need this value right here. The next budget I want to look at is called the production budget. And this one is inherently tied to your sales budget. You need to make sure that you produce enough to meet your sales. Now if you notice, the first rows are the same. Does not mean that I retyped all these in. Instead, I'm going to use cell references. I'm just going to say I want this to be equal to that, the same exact value. Now the reason why I'm doing that is I'm creating linkages, and when we get finished with this one, I'll show you why it's so important that you want these links. Looking back on the actual problem data, we're told a little bit about how our production is supposed to occur. So you can see we have materials, we have work in process, we have finished goods, and so on. These are our inventories. Now, let's stop and think realistically. A company is not going to produce just enough to make its sales. If we do that, then what are we going to do at the end of the month when we've sold everything and another customer comes in? Well, it may take us several days to create another unit. And so we basically are going to lose sales. So we have to make some kind of projection of how much inventory do we need to have on hand so that I can continually sell the product without running out of any items to lose those sales. And so you need these inventory policies. So basically, I want to look at finished goods over here. How much do you want on hand? And it says that in any given month, I want to make sure that you have 30% of next month's sales on hand. So basically, this is kind of telling me it takes roughly 10 days, a third of a month, to get units produced. And so I want to have on hand 30% of next month's sales so that I can keep selling while I am producing and I don't run out. Now, we're going to take that 30% and we're going to go back over here and say, all right, so if we want 30% of next month's sales, then let's take 30% of February. And that would yield me the 2,760 units. I would do the same thing for February, referring to March. But then when I get to March, well, the next month would be April over here. And of course, that's not going to be on our budget since we're just doing quarters. So I kind of need to know what I'm going to sell for April. And if I go back to the data sheet, well, we do have that information, and that's 9,800 units on April. So I'm going to take that and go back and put that in my budget over here. Just kind of like a little, I guess you might as well say like a working column over here where we're doing like little scrap notes. And so for this one, again, I would say I want 30% of April this time. Now, in the first line up here, I could add all the way across. But in this second line over here, I did not add all the way across. Instead, what you see are two values that are the same here. And this must always be true. Just ask yourself the question. What is the end of the first quarter? What's the date? Well, it's March 31st. And what is the end of March? It's March 31st. These two have to be the same. So essentially all I did was say, make it that. Excuse me. So I know I have my sales that I need to produce to meet. I need to produce to make sure you have enough on hand so that you can keep selling while you're producing. And we can add those two together to say these are the total units you need. And of course I can do that for all 3 months and a quarter. But think about something else. If you're going to have, for example, this 2,760 at the end of January, then the end of January, January 31st, is automatically going to come the beginning of February. There's no difference. Midnight, January 31st is the same at 12 a.m. on February 1st. So these values here must also be the same. Now, if you notice, it kind of creates this diagonal, and that's what I like to call it on a budget, a diagonal effect. And you can see that this is going to stem over even from January to February. So whenever you see the words ending and beginning, there's going to be a diagonal effect on here. That only leaves me with really one more value to come up with, and that's January over here. So it says, what is the beginning for January? Well, if I knew the beginning of February stemmed from January, and the beginning of March stemmed from February, then the beginning of March has to come from December. And remember, December is known data. And so going back to the data sheet, we're told that there were 1,500 units in finished goods at the start of the quarter. And so that is where the 1,500 came from. And one last detail to note, that beginning, which is January 1st, is also the same date of the beginning of the quarter. Just like up here, those two have to be the same. This has to be the same. So if you already had some on hand, and this is what you need, then taking out what you already have will reduce down to what you need to produce. So I just find the difference here, and I do that for all the months, and of course for the quarter. Now this production budget is going to set the scene for all of the other budgets that we need to do, and remember, this stems purely from the sales budget. Now we've done 3 budgets so far, and it's a good point for me to interject why I want you to link these with formulas. Invariably, when you go into a budget meeting to try and present it to get it approved, new facts may have happened recently or overnight, or someone in the room may disagree. And if someone changes the facts, you're going to have to go back and recalculate the budget. But that could take a long time unless you've programmed your budget as we've been doing so far. So let's assume that someone comes in and says, oh, we think we're going to have this huge after Christmas sale, and we're not going to sell 9,000, we're going to sell 20,000 units. So I can put 20,000 units in, and since I've used formulas in all of these areas, when I input that, you can see that everything instantly updates. So if it went back to 9, you can see, and if I put it back at 20, you can see it instantly updates. And when you put that in all the way down through this budget, you'll have an instant recalculation, and so essentially you're doing the budget in real time, and that's a good benefit. I'm going to pause the video right here so that we can stop it and go into part 2.